Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lion Face Guru podcast. And today we're going to focus on the full healing of trauma, or the possibility of whether this is possible through Tantric yoga methods. And we're particularly going to look at it in the light of facing modern day trauma, the unique modern challenges that we face as a Western civilization. Also, how we in the West, we've adopted spiritual practices, ancient spiritual practices from the East, and whether they are up to the task, because as a human civilization, we've never faced the particular types of traumas that we face these days. The West also have developed many modalities of attempting to deal with trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, childhood trauma, these types of things. Uh, so we're looking to see whether there's any potential for these, but also do we need to bring in a more pragmatic approach to these to this trauma, because the complex trauma that we face hasn't been faced before. In modern Western civilization, we have many comforts, conveniences, and luxuries that we never have before, but this comes at quite a cost because as a society, we've been through two wars, and now we are constantly bombarded with sensation overload. We're constantly bombarded with the news, social media, very low grade forms of very low grade forms of communication. We're very isolated. There's the breakdown of the family unit, the constant polarization of people in our society, the hectic pace of urban living, the lack of contact with nature, the lack of understanding of nature, and this complete void of meaning and uh, our spiritual life, and any kind of higher meaning or purpose. We are kind of pervaded with this pervasive nihilism in our society. So, how do we approach this? How do we adapt old spiritual methods from the East to the West to face these modern day complexities of trauma? And So we'll go through a very pragmatic approach. Today, we're mainly going to go through the theories of this, but we're going to touch on actual tantric methods and what we actually might bring to the table in terms of dealing with trauma and dealing with the complete cessation of trauma, which I think isn't an idea we have in the West. Western psychologies, psychoanalysis, and we're moving on to different ways of working with the body. We've realized there's more than just this brain that we have to deal with. We have to deal with somatic experiences of the body, and perhaps we even as a society moving to understanding that something further is needed. Through a lot of people are experimenting with shamanism and these types of things. So, what else is there that do we as a West understand what the full potential of healing trauma actually is, or do we see it just in terms of we're removing depression, we're removing post-traumatic stress disorder? But in my mind, that brings us from like a -10 to a naught. But there's so much more potential, and this is what tantric yoga reveals to us. The very view of tantric yoga is that at our essence, we are pure, unblemished beings, full of love, full of compassion, and this is naturally within us, but it's distorted through the traumas that we have. And the Western approach tends to focus on psychology, perhaps we're looking at more bodily stuff, but the tantric approach, I think, goes a little bit deeper than that to the actual subtle energies of the psyche. Where is the actual fundamental core root of this trauma? Uh, Not necessarily a physical dimension, but something deeper and more subtle and more fundamental. So, this is what we're going to discuss today. So, shall we begin with what is the actual definition of trauma, and particularly looking at complex trauma? Do you think you can give that a go, Simha?
I can try. So, I guess if we start by defining trauma, we can look at the word itself, the Greek word trauma, meaning just wound. And it can be used in different contexts. So, you have, like in medicine, they use trauma for physical trauma as well. But in this context, we are speaking about psychological or emotional wounds or traumas. And one important distinction, so usually when we speak about trauma, emotional or psychological trauma, uh, we associate it with acute trauma, that there is some, that trauma needs to have some big event, like big damaging event to be triggered. So either childhood events or really life-threatening accidents and so on. But there is also an emerging understanding of complex traumas that develop on the basis of like they develop over time, so that you have these overwhelming situations, and by overwhelming I mean that they overwhelm our uh, system. They overwhelm our psychology, regardless of the intensity of the actual like outer event, uh, if you can gauge that at all. But the experience is overwhelming, and so there is, instead of being processed normally, it leads to these wounds. So acute trauma and also complex trauma that takes place over time. And these psychic wounds affect our psyche or our psychology in the way that they disintegrate it, they fragmentate. Can you say that? They have a fragmenting effect, so that the being, like if we can speak of like a unified inner ecosystem suddenly becomes scattered or disintegrates into various conflicting aspects, which again then has a tendency to skew the traumatized individual's perception of reality. And this can take many different forms. It can have, there are, it affects in terms of thought patterns, emotional patterns, but also it affects the physical body. So there are, in terms of that fragmentations, you have parts that can be rejected altogether, meaning that like these whatever dynamic becomes rejected, whether it's like a behavior or whether it's a particular way of thinking, it becomes rejected from the conscious mind and kind of abolished to the depths, so that it becomes it operates without outside of like the conscious mind, so that the individual might not be aware of it. There is like a dissociation that can take place, that certain aspects feel very, or certain thoughts or emotions feel very alien. Um, it can, like, the inner feelings or emotions can be projected onto other people, so that uh, you might think that certain actions that others do, you might project like an intent that is not there in the other person, that stems from your mind, uh, but you experience it as somebody, that the intent actually belongs to the other person. Uh, and there is also, suppression of these conflicting, like uncomfortable or conflicting destructive patterns in yourself. And what makes it so difficult to work with trauma is exactly these various mechanisms I just went through, in that all of them make it very difficult to understand understand what's what, like what emotions are coming from this person, what is coming, it can be difficult to like understand whose emotions one is experiencing, where the source is, because of this unconscious factor or subconscious factor. It's also very difficult to recognize these patterns. And so it can seem like a very chaotic situation to be in, like very emotionally, psychological chaos that is very difficult to untangle and distinguish. And it's the reason, one of the reasons it's important to separate out trauma in the field of spirituality is that it's a very different beast from other types of confusion that the spiritual practitioner or any human being might experience, such as existential confusion, which we have covered in other episodes, but which focus more on subconscious existential categories, such as the feeling of being a me subject and the feeling of experiencing various objects in the outer world. So that can be, how do you say, deconstructed, like fully deconstructed, without that deconstruction process affecting these traumas. And so it will still operate within the mind. Does anyone have anything they want to add to that?
I thought your Nat's introduction and Simha, your presentation about what complex trauma is, it's like listening to professors speak about trauma. The way I kind of think about trauma and teach about trauma and trauma healing is kind of like well, I come from a working class, so I have no business in fancy academic halls where professors give lectures. Professors like yourself. Oh, trauma. It's been the last 4+ years in my life and in my practice, in my work. Trauma has been the main topic. It's been day and night. Trauma. So it's kind of starting to come out of my ears at this point. But it is a devastating condition, devastating thing what we are talking about. That has so many different types of sometimes debilitating effects on our health, on our social life, psychologically, of course, internally, really debilitating. So at least that's how it's felt for me. So it's not like I remember over the years. I'm not trained psychologist or psychotherapist. I have no formal studies of that field at all, and there are kind of, should I say, trends in some forms of Dharma around the world today, where Dharma teachers and Sanghas communities, they study about trauma. They study and do some trauma healing processes. But yeah, just like I think it was Nataraja in the intro, you said that that it doesn't seem like the full scope of traumatization is really understood, and also it is therefore not understood what it would mean to person's mind, to person's health, to heal trauma fully. And this is something that I focused the last 4 years and 3 months now, really day and night. And it's been really demanding process to do this, not only healing of my own complex trauma, but figuring out ins and outs and mechanisms and how the whole thing works, and which practices heal it the best. And yes, I think that based on my observations, I think that traumatization in the modern 21st century West, where people like each one of us live in cities, the meaning of traumatization is different. The scope of traumatization is different than before. And I'm not saying that complex trauma wouldn't have existed before, but at all. But I'm just saying that it's so common phenomena nowadays. So many of us have so unhealthy, psychologically unhealthy environments when we grow up. Parents who have problems, and their parents, our grandparents, have had traumatization through wars, and war is a really big one, because it like I remember my own grandfather who fought against the Russians in Second World War. He was like a artillery soldier in still one of the biggest battles, I think worldwide. So it was a massive battle that he was in, that lasted for a long time. But that completely shattered his psyche. And then when he came back home and then they had children, he would have these flashbacks, and he transmitted that war trauma, that incredible shock, complete shattering of his psyche to his wife and children, including my father, who then drank a lot, started heavy alcohol use when he was very young, and it just transmitted to me. So I have plenty of first-hand experience of this. And addictions, compulsive negative thinking, emotional dissociation, relationship issues, anger issues, chronic health problems. Myself, I've had migraines that I now know at some point learned that originate from this trauma that I've accumulated since I was 2 years old. All kinds of other health problems, digestive issues, sleeping problems, tiredness, like this exhausting tiredness, and of course, anxiety and depression are so widespread nowadays. I remember once reading this kind of, I don't know if it was like an official study or not, but it made sense to me, where it was like a brief comment that said that children nowadays, teenagers, they have as much mental health problems as people in mental health institutions in the 1950s had. And yeah, I don't know if it's scientifically correct or not. I'm not too scientific person, but it makes sense to me that that would be the case, because I'm closing 50 years of age now, so I grew up in the 1980s, and 1980s was 35, 40 years ago from now. And I remember even in a traumatized environment where I grew up, there was still a very different kind of much more organic and in that sense healthy atmosphere. But in modern cities, where I spend most of my life, that is not there anymore. So this is the reason why I feel that what humanity has been able to develop with the modern complex trauma is something new. And it's not gonna get better just like that. It's not gonna, at least that's how it looks like, that it's not gonna get easier, because the speed and stress and all of that, this stuff just seems to speed up all the time. And this will certainly, it's something unhealthy, the way how we live, how people live nowadays. And it just, if we look at the family unit, families nowadays, families, more and more families are broken. I'm not saying that, in previous decades when couples kind of stuck with it, so they might have had children, and where nowadays couples just get a divorce when they have small children. I'm not saying that it was better, a few decades ago when couples stuck together, but there are all these factors that kind of to contribute to further traumatization. So if you have gotten properly shocked when you were a small child, properly shocked, not only scared of, like getting a little bit scared about something, but properly shocked out of your, kind of, it's kind of like a small explosion that happens in the mind, in the energetics, in the subtle bodies, which actually breaks the energetics, breaks the subtle bodies. So when you have that as a foundation, and then all the unhealthy family environment, nobody is really giving a child support, nobody is really taking care of the child, keeping them safe. There is no sense of direction, no sense of safety. It will build up. And this is what we are seeing, what I'm seeing, what I have felt myself, that traumatization is escalating. That's how it looks like. Were you going to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, because there is this, I think there is this connection between. So you see, it reflects into when society gets fragmented as well, because that's what we're seeing, that we're like the social institutions, or like tribal, how do you say, like the social groups are becoming more fragmented, and they act as a stabilizing factor,
Yeah.
uh, because you can actually also, I can't remember where I heard it, but for children who have a difficult time, like in a broken family, if they have other mature, healthy role models, then they are much more robust. But how do you, like in today's society, you can hardly like speak to other people's kids, you know, because there's this kind of we are one unit and you're over there and we don't interact kind of. So there is like an outer social fragmentation that is they reflect each other, you know, with the inner fragmentation as well. So that was the point.
Something that I have wondered often is that there really doesn't seem to be well, not on like national level media. You know, I'm Finnish, I'm from Finland, so I still follow the news from Finland. I a little bit follow the news stream from US, but other than that, I don't really keep up with it. But, you know, in mainstream discussion, in, how do you say, mainstream, like a national discussion, there is discussion about stress and maybe a little bit of trauma, but as far as I'm aware, there is no real understanding how wide scope the, how do you say, the destruction that trauma makes, how wide scope that is. And that's kind of that's pretty shocking because yeah, it's not going to get better. Just so this really requires, this topic requires like a much more discussion and study than there is, but also in the context of Dharma and among meditators, the same problem is there. I remember in my days in Japan, wait a second, yeah, I think like when I was still practicing Zen, that's where I first saw like in like a Dharma community situation where I saw 2, 3, 4 people have proper trauma reactions. And it was, I never heard, well, apart from Zen in America nowadays, but this was 20 years ago when internet wasn't like it was now. So, you know, I wasn't aware that in the States there were Zen teachers and Sanghas that had some emphasis on psychotherapy. But in my days of Zen practice, this traumatization never came up with the teachers who I studied with. And in general, it's, I was just listening to another podcast, a competing podcast, where, little joke, where there were 2 Western Tibetan Buddhist teachers kind of just making a remark that, yeah, trauma is not discussed by Tibetan lamas, Tibetan Buddhist teachers, but also it's not really addressed or getting discussed in the Western Tantric world. But my view is that it needs to change. And the reason for that is that, like you said, Simha, emptiness realization doesn't heal trauma. So if we think a little bit technically, we've spoken about lots of technical details in this podcast in previous episodes, a lot of discussion about emptiness meditation and realization of emptiness. But realization of emptiness, or in common language selflessness, does not heal traumas. So one can be very advanced or completely have graduated the emptiness realization process, but still be very traumatized. And I have first-hand experience of this. You know, I was in a really bad shape, like I finished my emptiness process in March 2021, and then over the next 6 months after that, I really came to. It was a shocking experience to, you know, to have this selfless mind, but then have these really destructive, negative habits, compelling, compulsive habits run havoc, you know, and emptiness didn't really touch it at all, I would say. Maybe there was a little effect from, I spent a number of years with emptiness practice, with opening of bhumis and perfecting bhumis, but yeah, most of that traumatization was there intact, and it actually just kept building through the process of emptiness realization. That's pretty ironic, isn't it? But that's how it is, and the reason for that is because, like we've discussed in previous episodes, we have two different subtle bodies. We have causal body and astral body. So we have emptiness, the whole bhumi process in causal body, and then the other process in astral body. And that other process includes traumas. Traumas get stored in the astral body, in the meridian system. So that's where you need to work with it. And again, emptiness insight, vipassana meditation doesn't do a thing to it. So you need a different set of tools and different understanding to work with it. But it also should be said that, well, this episode is about trauma, but you know, traditional classical Buddhist theory speaks of the kleshas. Klesha. Klesha means like destructive emotions or negative emotions that are compulsive. But I think that, and I have actually experience of this with my gurus, with my masters, but my understanding is that when classical Buddhism discusses of these destructive emotions, it's the same emotional material with complex trauma as with, let's say, basic negativity, basic selfishness, but it's just much more intense when it gets to complex trauma. It's much more solidified, much more rigid. And that exactly, like energetically speaking, is what I think is new in, like a new challenge for modern Dharma. Any remarks about this?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about my sort of arc of understanding from the early days of discovering Buddhism. The reason I went to Buddhism is because I had tried all this psychology. I delved into it pretty deeply as a way to try and help myself, and always butting up against a wall all the time. I tried other things like qigong and yoga, and I was regularly exercising, and these things helped, but I could tell that they were always sort of temporary. They never they never did the job that I was looking for. So when I sort of thought about, is Buddhism actually working for me in the early days when I was going through some difficult existential stuff, and then figuring out, okay, well, it's awakening. Awakening's what I need. So then I'm turning my mind to the idea that awakening is going to solve everything for me. So you start to go through the process and you have insight. But it's something similar to, like you said, Bubba, is that in a way your traumas become more and more clear. Your mind becomes clearer and clearer. And one thing that that path has done for me, the causal body, is to really alleviate some of this existential angst that I've had. It's definitely done that. Um, along the way, I've always noticed lots of little tiny releases here, there, and everywhere. So it's clearly doing something. There's a lot more softness that came about by the path of awakening, uh, and I always had this sort of metaphor in my mind of what do you call it? Like one of those things that ties you in.
Straight check.
Yeah, that's it. Like a straitjacket, or being like a fly wrapped in a cobweb, just unable to move. Like any direction you go is it becomes useless. Could be this real sense of helplessness that comes from this existentialness, and a lot of that has definitely released. But the further you go along this path, the more you realize how the body somehow still suffers the physicalness of this suffering that's still left over for me, particularly in terms of like gut issues, tiredness in the body, um, uh, perhaps tension in the throat, a lot of shoulder stuff. Like I used to be really tight with the shoulders. I think that was something to do existentially, but that has dropped a lot. But it's amazing how much clearer you become about this other side of that you're still confused about these emotions that go on, not being able to identify where the emotions come from. There's a lot of that still left over. So there's clearly I wonder how pervasive that is. But when you look at in sort of the spiritual communities, if I look at past spiritual communities that I've been in, or look around other spiritual communities, you see a lot of people trying psychological methods and trying shamanistic methods and searching for other places other than just the standard Dharma. So it seems clear to me that there's something else that's needed.
I think I can add something about uh, like because my own experience, I entered the Dharma uh, based on like the conscious motivation was awakening, so emptiness realization. That was what I was attracted to. But I jumbled everything. So I knew something like I knew I had all kinds of emotional symptoms and reactivity, and be like having experiencing a lot of psychological chaos, or at least like to a certain degree, I was aware of that aspect. So that was jumbled in with it. Um, but even if I was aware of or read about trauma at that time, I wouldn't necessarily have said that, have made the connection. And I think this is very common in many different areas that you hear words, possibly a lot of times, like you're bombarded with different words, but you don't understand them or make the connection. And so in my case, I didn't make the connection to trauma until finishing the emptiness path and realizing that, okay, so that aspect has been solved. I could clearly identify what that aspect, but why the hell is all this left? And even then, it took me quite some time to accept that trauma label as a reason, or because I was seeking all kinds of different kind of externalizing the problem, not realizing that that is a symptom of trauma in and of itself, but kind of always looking for some solution, whether it be diet or whether it be like working out, and kind of being very confused about whether it stemmed from the physical body or whether like what's what. But my point is that it was a very gradual process of coming to terms with, or having some clarity with regards to the causes of what I was experiencing. Also, because I couldn't really identify what would have been so traumatizing about my upbringing or my childhood, youth, my life in general. So that's something as well that I think also on a social, like on a societal level, people live with all kinds of symptoms and different kinds of pain, but so does your neighbor, and so maybe it's just the way it is, or maybe maybe you just have to push through it or whatever. So it can be very difficult to make the connection and see both the scope and find the explanation for your own problems, which
Yeah,
makes it very hard to solve, like
yeah.
impossible.
Of course, like not having a culture of full healing of trauma, it's then you're kind of on your own. I made a little reference a few moments ago that, I have experience with my gurus that, like they are familiar with the basic klesha, basic negativity, let's put it like that, basic selfishness. But to them as well, modern complex trauma is something new. So, as a teacher and founder of this method, I've been in this situation where I've had to figure out, what is this stuff. But in general, it is my own story is a bit similar. We're very similar, like yours, Sima, in the sense that I was also when I learned about awakening, I knew that that's what I want. That's what I have been looking for. And then, like I briefly referred, I didn't learn about trauma not from Zen teachers who I studied with, not from my Tantric teacher, Sivakami. And to be honest, I think that, when then I started seeing references to trauma in the context of Dharma practice, I was kind of, what a joke, ridiculous. This is some kind of, how to say, namby-bamby nonsense. So this is for men who cry, that was my initial attitude, and that was my attitude for years. But again, I think what contributed to that poor or bad attitude of mine was that there is no culture for healing of trauma. It's not discussed in Dharma. It's not taught in Dharma. So of course, it's kind of floating in the air like a ghost in the air that isn't really clearly discussed. And yet this ghost affects and pesters so many of us. And if we think about trauma in a bit more tantric manner, what happens in the subtle body, in the astral body, is that not only that. Okay, so let's think of the astral body first, what it is. So we have two subtle bodies. One is causal, which is like a lighter, subtler of the two subtle bodies. And then there is like a grosser, denser, couldn't really say heavier, but in terms of weight, maybe you could say that the other one is light and the other one is heavier. And it's the astral body which is in the shape of the physical body. So it has the exact shape, but it's non-physical. When we speak of meridian system, exactly the same way how traditional Chinese medicine speaks of meridians, they are non-physical channels, but they are so close to the physical body that, like, extremely close. And what happens through complex trauma is that parts of that sections in the astral body get hardened, kind of turn into a rock. It is supposed to be like this. So if we think of the body space full of these meridian channels that are maybe the width of your small finger. So here the view is a bit different than in traditional Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine speaks of 20 plus meridian channels, but actually the whole body space is full of them. So if you think of your pinky and then imagine that the whole body space is filled with these long tubes, then you have a clear image what it is. And what happens through complex trauma is that parts, areas of those channels, they are supposed to be like soft and pliable, kind of like seaweed dancing in ocean waves, you know, soft, subtle, pliable. But what happens with trauma is that they get hardened. So the rest of the system can be still soft or quite soft, but there are bits that are hardened, like into a stone, into a rock. And this means that, you know, in the meridian system, just like in the causal body, there is vital energy, prana, ki, chi, circulating. But it doesn't circulate through that trauma knot. In my own case, my trauma knot was the size of my index finger, so quite big. And you know, we've had this discussion in our Sangha in Amrita Mandala for 3-4 years now, and people have said that, you know, my trauma knot is in the throat and it's about the size of a golf ball, or somebody says that it's in the chest or in the calf or in the hip or in the shoulder. But these dense hardened bits, and that's exactly the new thing, that as far as I know, traditional systems of yoga and dharma don't know and do not understand. So when you have, even though it's non-physical, even though you have soft tissue that hardens into a rock, it kind of specific circumstances are required for that. So you need like a traumatizing experiences throughout your life for several decades. You know, just getting what trauma does is that even if there isn't some, even if you are not badly treated, or even if somebody isn't really saying mean things to you, you might interpret that this happens. So again, when initial shock happens early on in life, and then similar events or as bad or worse events keep happening over a number of years, is that this skewed, this distorted view of oneself and people around you and world around you is created, comes into existence. And that's why, you know, I think that what happens with cancer is that cancer, it kills the environment where it grows. And I think that trauma is like that. Trauma is like cancer of the mind, because it does exactly the same thing. So it kind of turns against the, how do you say, like the ground where it grows, and then it just destroys it. And something about trauma reactions, which is good to understand, is that so we don't necessarily live well, we don't live in trauma reaction all the time. Trauma reactions are kind of like thoughts and emotions, they come and go. But when traumatization has developed into complex trauma, it means that your trauma reactions are really dense and really heavy. Kind of like getting into a boxing ring with a professional boxer on daily basis or whenever you have those trauma reactions. And it is extremely tiring, extremely tiring. So you have extreme fear like panic attacks, social anxiety, depression, or if it's something a bit more conceptual or intelligent, you might be have this compulsive cynicism about what is happening to you, what somebody said, and it's just compulsive, so it just keeps going on and on. And what happens with these trauma reactions, whatever the form of they are, is that you have that trauma knot somewhere, K-N-O-T, knot, trauma knot, in my case, originally size of my index finger, and then you have a trauma reaction, and it spreads its negative energy into the rest of the meridian system. In my case, it always pops up the spine in the back, and also from below my pelvic floor to the front of the body, coming up the chest, throat, face, and all the way up to the crown in the meridians. It kind of creates this dynamic grip. And that's the thing with trauma reaction, it's that it is dynamic. It doesn't just sit there, but it squeezes you, kind of like an octopus. It wraps the tentacles around your body, wherever the tentacles in everybody's personal case are, it wraps the tentacles around the body and then it starts squeezing. So there is this dynamic twist all the time, together with these compulsive negative thoughts and emotions. So this is what people with complex trauma are experiencing on a daily basis. Unless, if you never see anybody, if you are a recluse, live in a hut in wilderness off-grid, then maybe you don't have it on a daily basis. But if you live in cities, that's what you experience on every day when you meet people. Most people have trauma related to other people, so people-related trauma. So even if you are with your friends, you will have these reactions just because you get triggered so easily. But yeah, what happens is that this complex trauma creates these hardened knots in the system. But what also happens is this dissociation. Dissociation is a concept used in Western psychology, and we have the exact same meaning. But what happens in the subtle body with dissociation is that it's like a bigger segments, bigger areas of the meridian system are kind of like in Monty Python movies. Somebody might hit you on the shoulder with a axe, and then the whole arm is hanging from like a piece of skin, but it's still hanging there, so it doesn't drop off completely. That exact same thing happens with dissociation. So it's like this bigger areas, like bundles of many meridians kind of are hanging out, but they are still holding, so they don't fall off. They are still kind of hanging there. But what also happens is that meridians get broken. It's kind of interesting because originally meridian channels are these soft, pliable, flexible, organic channels. But when there is that initial trauma, it breaks those channels. And it's kind of like having a glass, and then you hit it with a hammer, and it gets bits of it fall off. The whole cup doesn't break, but some bits of it falls off. This also happens with complex trauma. And the result of this, having this dense knot, having dissociated bigger areas, and having many channels that are broken, is that even if you are not doing anything, vitality keeps spilling out, prana keeps spilling out from the system. Kind of like an analogy would be kind of the opposite analogy, having a boat that has holes, leaks at the floor, so water comes in. Exactly the same thing happens with complex trauma. It just spills out, keeps spilling out. And that's why, because the meridian system is broken, even if you're not having trauma reactions, it keeps spilling out. So even if you're at home, not meeting anybody, just watching your favorite movies, making yourself tea and having a day off, you can feel tired, very tired at the end of the day without doing anything. But then it just, it multiplies when you are seeing people, when you are going into those situations that trigger your traumas. Then it just, or if you get angry, if some people have, let's say, melancholy or sadness as a trauma reaction. To some people it's anger. But when we are talking about any negative, strong emotion, it's like the whole prana, the gas, the energy that you have for the day, it spills out in minutes when you have a strong trauma reaction, and then you're just exhausted, you're out of it for the rest of the day. That's how it is.
I would like to say something about this, what you just said, the picture you painted of the astral body and how it can be affected by trauma, or how it is affected by trauma in different ways. Because I think that if for people who are listening who might not have a lot of experience with tantric practice, this might seem like speaking in metaphors, or might be understood as like a metaphor, that this is happening metaphorically. But so first, to address that this astral body that is being painted a picture of here, the purpose behind it is to guide practice. It exists there as a dimension to our experience, and this model is designed, or having it incorporated as a model is designed to access this experientially, so that one might be, or one will be able to experience the things that you speak about, the various ways that it is broken, and the benefits of this, as opposed to other ways, or lacking such a clear instruction to access or to map out in one's own experience, to connect with the astral body, is that on the one side, we already mentioned the problem with applying emptiness practices. And this is a very, like, once you get to know the different feel, it's a very effective, these instructions are very effective to get to understand what's what is a existential, or like a causal karmic or karma, and then an astral or meridian trauma, knot, or karma. And then I also wanted to say that there seems to be a common understanding that these traumas are located in the physical body. I think you already mentioned it. And there are a lot of, I think there are some techniques emerging that work energetically with, like, they actually locate knots and then use that as the entry point to working with traumas. So I can't speak about the effectiveness of it, but what seems to be, they still seem to understand it as a physical tension, even though they might accidentally open up the energetic experience of the trauma. But I think that having this clear framework, mapping out the three different bodies and getting to know each in practice, has major benefits to reach deeply into the astral body and the energetic dynamics of trauma, so that you can work. There is such, like, a lot more flexibility in working with these, and getting to understand oneself and one's trauma patterns on an energetical level.
I remember 4 years ago, roughly 4 years ago, when I started teaching based on my own discoveries about trauma healing. First beginning with, simple explanation what the astral body is, like I just explained, and then taking it into practice. I remember that for a good, regular people who joined my teachings retreats since then, back then, it took them maybe half a year to a year to really understand that what kind of sensations the astral body, what kind of sensations we are talking about. And also, it took some time for them to discover where their knots were. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when we have a theory, I just discussed, astral body, that it's denser of the two, grosser of the two subtle bodies. It's inside of the body, same shape as the physical body, and then there are these knots, then there are broken channels, and then dissociated parts. This is, of course, we are practitioners of yoga. So we are talking about, this is not like a theory. We are talking about this theory to help us in practice. But it takes time and regular efforts on meditation cushion to really understand what we are discussing here. So that goes without saying. Another thing that I wanted to add, actually I had in my mind earlier, is that it is incredibly difficult to bring awareness, to become aware of one's traumatization. And I think that good analogy for this, I remember working with the Bhumis, working with the causal body, working with existential suffering, self-delusion, and releasing that material, those bits of delusion into selfless space, Dharmakaya. That was at moments challenging, because you're working with stuff that is in the subconscious mind. You're working with stuff that you do not, that are not immediately available for you. That's what it means when stuff is in the subconscious mind. It's not like immediately here, there is something going on, you feel that something is off, but you can't immediately catch it, you can't immediately detect it. And then when you keep bringing awareness into your body, into your mind, into your subtle bodies, little by little you start illuminating this vault, the subconscious vault, and whatever is stored there. So it's a process, and it requires need to solve it, and then effort to keep doing it so that you actually get somewhere, so that things change. But I think that trauma is much harder to work with because it's a very good analogy if I say that traumas are in the subconscious of the subconscious. So it's like a double whammy. They are like hidden twice as deep or thrice as deep as just habits of selfing. So this is my experience, and this is what makes, that's the thing with trauma, that it makes you see world in a different way, in a skewed, in a distorted, broken way. And that starts happening in my case when I was 2 years old. So I'm 46 now, so 44 years of my life. That's something like 97%, 96% of my lifetime, day and night. So it's a distortion that is so deeply ingrained, so deep built into the system, that it makes it very difficult, especially in the beginning of trauma, to start learning the game, how it works. In my case, I can say that it's very challenging, very challenging. But it's doable. But it's doable. That's the thing. Should we continue with the actual healing? Do you guys want to start?
Well, I was thinking as you were speaking there, sort of how the West has approached this through psychoanalysis. Um, in a way, the sort of the plain psychoanalysis can only bring you to your memories that are on the surface. And in the early days, I think that it's quite clear that there was a lot of harm caused to people because you're bringing back people back to their traumatic memories, but there's no the only basis you have that is your relationship with the psychotherapist.
Yeah,
Um, there's so this is why trust becomes a really important point within psychoanalysis. Um, so then there are other modalities that deal with they take people into hypnosis. So perhaps that's a little more effective because you're getting a little bit deeper. The hypnosis is grounding you in some calmness, etc. There's some good body work being done with people, which really focuses on yogic breathing, mantra. There's a guy called Peter Levine with somatic experiencing. He sort of he was a psychotherapist for NASA, but he secretly went off and did some shaman type stuff. He learned a lot of body work and chanting from them. Maybe he did some psychedelics and things and discovered a few things. But he for a couple of decades he was sort of secretly introducing this to people because it wasn't really something you could bring into the mainstream. And then when people's minds started opening up a little bit more, he could start introducing some more of this stuff. But I'm just relating that to what is one of the real benefits of this process, because you're digging into some deep, dark stuff, is that we have refuge. And this is a basis for tantric practice, is to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, etc. The Buddha within also, and that's a really important concept. The view, which is the essential point of beginning tantric practice, is that we are pure, undefiled at our basic essence. It's always contactable. We always have the ability to turn our attention to our Buddha nature to support us. And we might do that in terms of we first because it can be too difficult for the self to turn itself on itself. So we turn to deities, Guru Rinpoche and Babaji. Baba has in the background there. But these are archetypes of our own essence. They are part of who we are. So this is the important basis of tantric practice and where we kind of start from.
Sima, do you have anything to add there?
Well, not to exactly that point, but well, it's an important point that we already have this enlightened nature, in brackets, inside of us, that it is accessible to us, that it can be revealed, so that the basic view is that we are already whole in a way, and so that it follows from that the experience of being whole, untraumatized human beings can be revealed. So as the kind of like the outset of the practices, and contacting this already mentioned some ways, or becoming in tune with this inner perfection many ways, but when it comes to specifically Amrita Mandala trauma practices, I think they rest on this I'm blank. Maybe somebody else can take over.
Well, what do our trauma healing practices rest on? Well, the basic view in Amrita Mandala, like in any tantric method, is that what is broken or what is lost can be fixed, can be rediscovered. So I think that, in some forms of Christianity, for example, there is the view that we will always remain sinners. We will always have some impurity in us that binds us to making mistakes and sins and to accumulate karma for ourselves. But this is not the view in Buddha Dharma. This is not the view in Sanatana Dharma, in Hinduism. So we have pure nature, call it pure self, God within us, soul. I like soul. I used to, back in the day when I was teaching Kriya Yoga, which I still teach, Amrita Kriya, I was speaking of soul a lot. But I kind of, for many years, I didn't think about soul. But so we have this nature in us, likeness with God, likeness with Buddha, enlightened being, that is always in us as a potential that we can rediscover, and then through healing practices and purification practices bring back, establish in our body and mind. In Amrita Mandala we have like a long list of healing practices of different types. I spoke about broken channels and dissociated parts of the subtle body. I spoke about the knots, and because of that, those three main categories of brokenness, we have a number of practices to fix those problems. One simple example of so-called trauma specials, trauma healing practices that I've taught in trauma specials, is that what happens with complex trauma is that we suppress our emotions. We suppress anxiety, anger, lots of stuff can be, insecurity. We suppress so much of that stuff, and that stuff gets stored in that trauma knot. In my case, that trauma knot, it's no longer this big, the size of my index finger. It's now just a small bit of that, but it used to be this big in my tailbone, right there in the, going to the tip of my tailbone, and there from straight up the, how do you say, the sacrum bone. And all of that stuff, those shocking memories, suppressed emotions over decades, it gets packed tightly to create that knot. And it's packed extremely tightly, which is why anybody who tries our trauma healing practices or any type of trauma healing, first of all needs lots of patience. It will be extremely frustrating for certain, but you need patience. But one basic practice that we have is a reverse suppression of emotions. And what does that mean? And here, before maybe before going there, what Nataraja said about refuge, this is extremely important. I don't know, I have never seen a therapist, so I don't know about, maybe if you are fortunate to find a really good therapist that you feel like working with, then that relationship of trust is built after some time of seeing that therapist. But I know that there are not many great good therapists out there. Educated therapists, yes, but not really people who can practice it well. I'm saying that based on over the years, people have come to me, especially the last few years, people have shared their experiences with therapy, and that's one of the things they have told me, that they might have seen half a dozen therapists but didn't really find anybody who they felt like working with for whatever reason. But yes, refuge is extremely important in Buddha Dharma. Refuge also exists in Hinduism. Refuge exists in Christianity because people turn to Jesus and God for refuge and support. But this is very important because we get concretic support and safety from the refuge, which we in Amrita Mandala we have fivefold refuge, taking refuge in Guru, Pure Land, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. In all of Buddhism, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, there is threefold refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And somebody might think that you are taking refuge, bowing down and praying to Buddha, for example, Buddha Shakyamuni, the founder of Buddhism, outside of us, this figure outside of us, or taking refuge in Dharma teachings and taking refuge in the enlightened community Sangha. But really, these refuges are in us. Our very nature, our own Buddha nature is the refuge. So taking refuge has this kind of dual purpose and dual effect that both gives us clarity and support. And we need that support when we are working with, well, it can be like a very stubborn delusion, self-delusion, when working with bhumis, emptiness practice. but especially when we are working with traumas, because you are working with the most awful and horrible experiences and memories that has happened to you in your life, those most shocking experiences. And when you are practicing something like reverse suppression of emotions, you are purposefully and willingly inviting for those suppressed memories and emotions to come up. And some of that stuff will shock you. And I'm not talking about in the sense of re-traumatization. I'm talking that it will shake you. It will make you scared. It will make you cry. It will make you sad, melancholic. It will make you furious, just enraged. All of that stuff and any of that stuff. And when that happens, you need refuge. You need something, whether it's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, threefold refuge, or God, that will help you to, okay, no, don't worry. This can be sorted out, no matter how bad it gets. And in my case, I can say that it gets really bad, but did get really bad, but there's kind of this internal, wouldn't really say peace, but kind of bedrock that doesn't disappear. And this is, of course, something extremely precious. One feature of trauma is that you haven't had, perhaps, you couldn't trust your parents, you were emotionally neglected, your emotional needs were not met, you weren't hugged, you weren't kissed, you weren't listened to, you weren't supported. So that ground, that refuge wasn't there. But because we have Buddha nature, which is Buddha nature is the same if we think of God not as a judgmental bearded figure sitting on a cloud, not a judgmental figure, but a God that is love, God that is acceptance. Then we can say that, oh, that's the same as Buddha nature. God is intelligent, just like Buddha nature is. And where that intelligence is buried, where that love, acceptance, non-judgmentalism is buried, is in us. So it might appear that we are taking refuge to God outside of us or Buddha outside of us, but this God-likeness or Buddha Dharma Sangha is in us. And this is what we need. We need that support when we are working with stuff. In Amrita Mandala we have, like I said, many techniques that we use to, when we have broken channels, we fix them. I use the analogy of a broken cup where parts of the glass have fell out. So we have techniques that enable us to put the broken pieces back to where they belong. Same also I use the analogy of the severed arm that is hanging by the skin. We have techniques called reintegrating dissociated parts of the psyche that enables you to put the arm back, kind of sew it back on. We have healing of ancestral trauma. We discussed, I told you about my grandfather who got traumatized in Second World War, battling the Russians in one of the biggest cannon fights in history of wars. And this ancestral trauma has passed to me. So I have inherited from my family this from my father and grandfather, this ancestral trauma. So we have, for example, healing practice for that. So different types. But also what is interesting is coming back kind of a little bit to the world of psychology, Western psychology. We in Amrita Mandala, we speak of something called pure psyche. Or this is simply a term that I've used, pure psyche. So instead of broken or damaged, injured psyche, we have the view of pure psyche. So if injured psyche means because of complex trauma, it means that we are experiencing many of the everyday situations, thoughts, emotions, memories, and then, how do you say, when somebody says something to us and it triggers something, we are experiencing our daily life through these distortions, through that injured, damaged psyche. Nevertheless, in Amrita Mandala we have this view in the teachings of the path of healing and light. We have this view that even if that complex traumatization is there, there is something called pure psyche in us. Which means that psyche, without those injuries, distortions, without those filters that make us see and experience something painful, something hurtful. And we have practices for this pure psyche. So, well, a few different practices, but understanding that just like in Buddhist terms we have Buddha nature, that no matter how deluded, no matter in how bad shape, no matter what you have done, maybe you have done something awful, something hurtful in your life, you will never, this will never make your Buddha nature go away. You will never lose your Buddha nature, despite of your actions. And it's the same when it comes to, in a kind of psychological context. No matter what has happened to you, there is the pure psyche, healthy psyche, without those damages and injuries, and that we can call it back with the help of affirmations. We have this I affirmation. We have this. What is fascinating, I think, from psychological perspective, is that now I'm kind of talking. Well, it doesn't really matter if I'm talking about post-emptiness, after realization of emptiness or not. But if we understand that, what this injured psyche means, what the experiences of it are, and what this pure psyche is. This pure psyche means simply that you feel whole, you feel safe being who you are, you do not have doubts, you don't feel scared, or you don't doubt your own doings, thoughts, skills, abilities. You feel whole. So pure psyche, whole psyche. And when we have this basic understanding, we can use this I affirmation, this simple word, I. So me, I, without those distortions. And simply cultivate, get like a felt, experienced sensation of this pure psyche. And so we use this I affirmation, bringing it back, getting a taste of it, getting a taste of what this pure psyche means. It's a process that gives a lot of healing, creates a lot of healing. But also something that is interesting is that I remember I've heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama say so many times that everybody, all beings are seeking for happiness. All beings are seeking for happiness. And this happiness that he's speaking of, he's not speaking of momentary happiness, but lasting happiness. And the only thing that can offer us, give us lasting happiness, is the happiness inside us. Happiness, which is like a feature or a facet of this pure nature, Buddha nature of ours. What is the easiest way to get in touch with that? Wish happiness for yourself. May I be happy. That's another affirmation that we use. And it's a really simple one. If I had heard about happiness affirmation where you say to yourself, may I be happy every now and then, if I had heard it 15 years ago, I would have laughed, oh, ridiculous practice, absolutely nonsense. But no, it really works. And what is fantastic is that it gives you I affirmation, happiness affirmation, all these fixing the channels, reverse suppression of emotions when you release stubborn negativities, or reintegrating these dissociated parts of the astral body. It actually changes you and it changes your life because it changes you. So again, we are not talking about some mind tricks or thought tricks. We are talking about actual physical, emotional experience. We are actually talking about not reacting in an angry way, not lashing out in situations where you might have lashed out 1,000 times before, or not getting, how do you say, like what is that word? It's kind of not getting beaten if somebody says something mean to you, says that, oh, you're worth nothing or something like this. You might have reacted to that, oh, kind of getting beaten 5,000 times before in your life. But when you heal your psyche, then that reaction is gone. That reaction is gone. So you also build this healthy psyche. Pure psyche means that healthy boundaries are getting revealed or built, automatically revealed, I would say. And it's not something that, like healthy psychological boundaries, it's not something that you have to constantly think about. This is what I mean with a mind game, like thought game, that okay, now I have to set boundaries because he or she is calling me an idiot or a prick, and then it's not a mind game that I'm kind of battling against it. What we want is like a spontaneous, effortless health in psychological terms, and that means that those boundaries get automatically, they appear when our psyche gets healed. Yeah.
I have one comment on that just to like elaborate on those boundaries, or healthy boundaries, because my experience has been that, well, trauma is very much involves unhealthy boundaries in one way or another. So I'm not just speaking about having no boundaries, but also this control mechanism. But
Yes.
what I've discovered is that this control mechanism is healthy boundaries having gone crazy. Like it's that same ability to make naturally have boundaries, but it just goes crazy and it's too tight or it's too relaxed, and you get, depending on what kind of traumatization. And also, you mentioned these basic, like you said, simple practices of I affirmation, or affirming happiness and these qualities. But I found that like the most difficult thing with for me, the most difficult thing about working with traumas is to refrain from wrestling with them. So
Yeah.
and these simple practices, like the foundation, it seems to be like it's so important to contact these, because within this genuine happiness there is curiosity and openness to experience, and those are essential parts of actually releasing that stuck energy that these traumas represent as represent. And so all of these other practices have been groundbreaking for me. But like that most difficult aspect is the just how do you approach them? Because
Mm.
like when we speak of these practices, reintegrating dissociated parts or putting together broken parts, this also releases the stuck energy within those, and you have to experience them, and then like my experience has been for me that I often end up just wrestling with it as if it is a problem that needs to be solved. And these
Yeah.
genuine positive qualities, establishing them over and over again, glimpsing them over and over again, I don't think it can be done without. I don't I don't think it's like possible to go through the process without having not just the concept of a pure psyche, but the actual experiences repeated over and over again.
Yeah, that is a brilliant point. I came to think of something. Um, as we were discussing taking refuge and how important it is. So we are talking about spiritual practice here. Spiritual practice that has understanding of basic, solid understanding of uh, psychology in the light of trauma. But we are talking about spiritual practice. If I had to say what kind of practice it is spiritual practice. And I think that one thing that contributes to traumatization of modern people is them having left their religions. So I think that even if a religion is belief based, going to church every once in a month on a Sunday or every Sunday based on a belief, not necessarily that clear or solid experience of Jesus Christ's presence or God's presence, but believing in this Almighty God, or not necessarily being a Buddhist meditator, but still going to, well, we don't really have temples and monasteries in the West, but this happens in Asia. There are Buddhist believers, followers of Buddhist religion. But I think it contributes hugely to the traumatization that people in Asia don't go to temples anymore, and people don't go to churches in the Christian world. Definitely, it adds to the problem hugely. And what was it that I was thinking about? So yeah, we are talking about like spiritual healing here, really. Sorry, there was some point that I was gonna say, but it completely slipped my mind. So maybe we just continue, or did you have?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about Simha mentioned glimpses, and we're trying to dig deep with these practices. So what you're saying with the spiritual faith, we're looking for a faith that's not blind. We're uh, assessing something that can be actually seen in your own experience, and through actual glimpses, we're starting to discover this pure psyche. And with our practices, we're trying to go at it with a chipping away with as deep as we can go, using dynamic concentration, not just for the causal body, but also for the astral body. And this is the the basis of the refuge that you go to, this is a refuge that you're not relying on any type of external refuge or trust in someone. This is a refuge that you can discover deep within yourself and take with you wherever you are. And we're using practices that dig up some of the most difficult, deepest stuff, and therefore we have to have a solid basis. And trauma itself is at its heart, at its core, destabilizing. That's what it does. It dissociates you from true reality. It causes rifts in your relationships with others and yourself. And so, where do we look to? Where do we go to for the ground? It's nowhere to be found outside of us. It's directly here within us. And glimpses and even cessations and discovering your true nature helps you begin to see that there's so much more potential, that just removing depression and having a sort of dull, mundane life is not what we're aiming for. We're aiming to realize our own true Buddha nature, this effortless love, that not trying to do these techniques over and over again so that we keep reminding ourselves. We're actually accessing who we are to be who we are, to stabilize ourselves in our Buddha nature. And so a simple glimpse of this really helps. I wanted to sort of say that I had a release earlier this morning, and it's really interesting when you have an actual release. Like I'm talking about it because it was sort of a release in the temple. It's just this beautiful, blissful spot. I don't know whether you guys experience something similar. Sometimes you have releases that affect your whole being, but then you can have sort of isolated. I've found with the meridians, just this sort of local release, which was extremely blissful, and it feels blissful because this is that sort of bliss that you experience is actually your Buddha nature, how you actually are, without this trauma and this ache of the body and this pain and existential crisis that you go through. To actually realize or recognize a little bit of who you are makes you realize that there is a path to progress, and there is relief from this deep suffering that we all experience to different degrees. So I wanted to mention also dynamic concentration as part of the practices of meridian purification. One last point before I forget was that we were talking that this is in the we're talking about healing of the meridians, which is the subtle energy bodies, but we can also actually talk about the traumas in the actual physical body as well. So we are directly working with the physical body, but we're also talking about that it goes a bit deeper than that too.
Yeah. Before I explain the thing that I forgot a few moments ago, yeah, there is like an echo effect. Just like a causal body sends like an energetic echo into the astral body, the astral body, with all its traumas and negativity, selfishness, sends an echo to the physical body. And at one point I was talking about like a octopus with its tentacles and its dynamic grip and dynamic power, dynamic twist. So we can really physically feel that. You know, that's what triggers migraines. That what makes your gut twist, gives you gut problems. You know, I have even discovered in my own practice that this dynamic grip, pull, elastic pull of the meridians, it dislocates joints. It actually dislocates bones. Energetics have that strong of an impact on a human body. I don't have scientific data to back this up, but I have my own experience. I have sat so much with trauma healing that I have seen the exact causes and roots of what has been going on, like migraines, my chest plates getting dislocated, my finger joints my fingers getting numb, and kind of like, what do you say? How do you say in English when you have like these ants running in your nerves?
Pins and needles.
Yeah, pins and needles. Yeah, and then getting my finger joints dislocated. So I have seen in my practice that all of that is triggered by trauma. But something that came to our mind when we were speaking of refuge, uh, basically all practitioners, whether they are believers or practitioners of Buddhist meditation, in Buddhism, they take refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha. And I kind of just started thinking that, well, in Buddhism there are two main categories of meditation. There is shamatha meditation and there is vipassana. Vipassana for the causal body, for existential problems, for self-delusion. Shamatha for the astral body. So all this mindfulness practice, whether in secular context or Buddhist context, all this embodied sitting, perhaps in Zen Buddhism or in Vajrayana Buddhism, they are all shamatha practice that is supposed to address the astral body. Of course, anybody who sits down, feeling the body, scanning the body, does that for, let's say, 3 years, 1 hour a day, there is certainly a difference before and after. Not only in terms of gaining age, but change in the meridians in the astral body. But then, just to point out the exact meaning and purpose of trauma healing, is that if you don't have a clear view about trauma healing, if you don't understand that you might be affected by traumas, if you don't have that know-how in your sitting, then what happens is that, well, over time, some trauma habits may change a little bit, but they don't just magically get healed. This is the case with everything, isn't it? That we need to have the correct view, correct theory, so that things can turn into practices and experiences. Yeah. So just wanted to say that healing from complex trauma isn't just magically going to happen if you don't really understand, if there's no discussion, there's no support and specific practices for it. It's just not going to happen spontaneously like that. It's too sticky to work out that way. It's just not going to happen.
There seems to be examples of people who, over maybe quite a few years or decades of training shamatha, they have purified their meridian body, their astral body. But you're saying with the modern day situation, also people having modern day busy lives as lay people rather than monks that can sit in a cave. We need to approach these practices in a different way, perhaps more directly, more specifically
Oh,
using these practices.
oh, definitely, definitely. If somebody has 60 years where you do not much else than sit all day long every day, then it might work out. But in other case, no, it's not going to work out. And we've discussed a lot about trauma and the healing of trauma and the nature of trauma healing, but maybe we should discuss that pure psyche, purified psyche, original psyche, and purified astral body a bit. So there is something we've actually made 2.5 years ago with Simha. We made an episode of the light body, and this is something that is immediately related to trauma and astral body, because when marks of trauma, marks of selfishness are removed from the astral body, and when the astral body, the full scope of the astral body is activated, that is again together with purified causal body, that is the body of light, light body, rainbow body. So healing, even fully healing traumas, doesn't mean automatically that it is like an enlightened body of a Buddha. So it needs to be completely returned to the original purity, and also have the whole system up and running, activated. Same thing happens when one journeys through the bhumis, perfects 10 bhumis, 1 through 10, then the whole causal body is up and running, fully active at all times. We have 22 people in our Sangha who have accomplished this. But when you combine that causal body purity, emptiness, wisdom, with purified, completely purified and activated astral body, that's what rainbow body is. So-called twofold enlightenment: causal body, astral body, physical body. But there's actually, so if we speak of the body of light, I would say that purifying both subtle bodies is what you can already call it, rainbow body or light body. But it actually goes one step further to the physical body. So, but in my view, you can call it light body if you have twofold enlightenment, or 3. So, because the karmic causes are removed entirely with the 2 subtle bodies. Yeah. Sima, would you like to discuss a little bit about the practices that we, in the light of body of light, how do we do that?
So the main sequence, Amrita Kriya Yoga, is a way to is one of those ways to is a system that is based on, that combines all the principles of activating the light aspect of this astral body. You mentioned already that you have the removal of traumas and then that activation part, where we use different techniques on the basis of the guru's blessing, and different aspects of gurus, different qualities of gurus as tantric deities, and then bring them deeply into the astral body to cover all the various meridian threads, and spontaneously activate this body to again reveal that the actual experience of the non-duality of this practice, that we are these qualities, we are this light that emerges or that is activated. Maybe somebody else could say something about Kriya Yoga before we move on to. If you haven't noticed, I'm not great at picking up threads, opening new parts of the podcast.
What is your both experience of practicing Amrita Kriya Yoga?
So first of all, the whole if I step back from uh, Amrita Kriya specifically, just Amrita Kriya Yoga specifically, just to get a like a get an get a better view of how I experienced this whole path. Um, it took a long, like the first part was just kind of identifying the difference. We already touched upon this, but like what is it that we're working with? What is this field we call the astral body, and get to know that. Um, and my experience of Amrita Kriya Yoga was also a challenge in the beginning because it doesn't follow exactly the same rules as the practices that I were used to, that were more, how do you say, they were experienced more gradual, that you kind of begin here and then you move deeper and deeper. Uh, but how I've experienced Amrita Kriya Yoga is that there is a so even though technically this is the case with other practices as well, it becomes very obvious that each part of the practice contains that whole activation mechanism, uh, so that it becomes a very once you get a hang of it and actually start relaxing into the practice, it is not experienced as a sequence, but as a kind of non-linear, just activating and resting in that inner experience of luminosity, the luminosity of this uh, astral body. And then you just keep doing that same thing over and over again. And then there is that sequence as well, like sequentiality to the practice to ensure if one angle doesn't quite hit it this day, today, then the next might. So that you kind of end up with that experience every time. And it becomes very, as I said, like there it is that recalibration, or there was that recalibration period for me. But once I got it, it became like the basic principle is very simple to repeat. At least not necessarily every time, but you get some effect. You get some revealing some of these qualities every single time. So I think this is like what stands out for me with this practice, has really shown this non-linearity that makes perfect sense in the context of the whole astral body, how it works, how the purification process works too.
I'd say that's pretty similar to my experience, this non-linearity of it, compared to the working through the Bhumis process, or almost with the Bhumis, you're cycling around very similar stuff at sort of similar stages, from opening in the early stages to perfecting in the early stages, and the various stages are similar. Um, it's if I sort of track sort of when we began just experimenting with meridian type stuff. I think in the early days, like we worked with Hindu deities, Buddhas, and it was obvious that there was much more physical feel. We worked with Agastya, who suddenly very embodied feel. You feel it much more physically, but sort of not understanding quite why. We worked with the Dasha Mahavidyas for a while, and I quite enjoyed that practice. And I guess almost that's like being punched in specific places. And I had what I thought was a boomy opening whilst practicing with the Dasha Mahavidyas, but now looking back on it, I realized that actually some sort of whole layer was peeled off from the astral body, and so it almost felt like an awakening experience, but there was something a bit different to it. But I was still not working out what the difference between the two bodies are until my first experience of proper Paravasta when we did Kriya Yoga with Amrita Sundari. And this is a deity given by Agastya. And uh, it was like being, it's hard to describe, but almost like being vacuum packed or like being put in a pressure chamber. So it's something of that sort of feel where it's like the entire system. For me, it was really instant with Amrita Sundari, and so I practiced with her after we came away from that retreat every night, usually whilst lying in bed because I focused on my causal practice, but then lying in bed, it was always instantaneous with me with Amrita Sundari, uh, and eventually there's a release that happens. I wish I sort of had written more of a journal about it, but so I could try and remember it because you always forget that what the actual experience is until you have your next one. All the dark stuff comes back after the honeymoon period, but there's definitely this experience of there's localized tensions and knots which distort the whole system in various ways. Usually you have bigger knots or smaller knots in different places. And for me, I've discovered uh, one of my main ones is in my gut. I've got one in my head, and also I've got one that sort of it sort of twangs when you access Buddha nature. My neck will jolt like that. It's if I connect to the boomy pillar, just every now and again, it sort of goes past that knot and twangs. uh, but at the same time, there's this definite experience that there's layers of it. There's the gross layer, subtle layer, and a much more subtle layer. And I can't say that I have access to the very subtle layer very much, but when the more it feels like a more gross layer came off, and then your whole experience of just being in life is suddenly so much more grounded. You're walking around like just everything feels as it should. Things don't feel off anymore. And what I really noticed when that layer shifted was just this access to this physical sense of bliss in your body. You can go through the day and things are difficult, but then when you come back to the meditation, you can instantly access it. You sort of put your attention to your meridian, your astral sensation, and you can feel the sense of bliss, which is very natural in us. There's nothing high about it whatsoever. It's purely grounded, a really beautiful feel. Nothing high or elated. It feels normal and natural. But then time goes on, and eventually that disappears as you chip away with your pickaxe, and more dirt comes up. And this is what you're trying to access this ground again, the experience of the pure psyche of your own Buddha nature, whilst you're kicking all this dirt up. And sometimes memories can come back. And you're talking about reverse suppression, and we were working with Kawapo, shaman, previous life of Guru Rinpoche, to work with mending the meridians, but also bringing up reversing your deep stuck emotions and allowing them space to come up. Of course, you have to have a deep sense of your refuge when that happens. And for me, there were memories that came up that were when I was about 2 years old. I didn't think I had memories of that, but just this sense of something dramatic and difficult that happened in the family. And these experiences are coming up that how could you possibly access that sort of stuff through just your basic psychoanalysis? It's just not going to happen. But this is accessing that deep stuff. And then when you work through it, then you re-experience what your natural grounded bedrock nature is. So that's some of my experiences.
You reminded what you just said reminded me of, you know, that very first traumatic experience that I had when I was 2 years old was related to violence, violent scene, where there was sense of danger, being in danger. So it kept coming into my mind kind of as a blurry memory, very blurry memory. I didn't remember exactly what happened, just like a vague memory. It kept popping into my mind for maybe 40 years, pretty much on daily basis. If not every day, then every other day. But it would remind itself through all those decades. And it wasn't until I had worked with trauma healing for some time, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when I was using reverse suppression of emotion and memories, inviting, calling for the memories to come up. And then suddenly I saw it crystal clear that night, that what exactly happened. And I wasn't re-traumatized, it wasn't re-triggering of trauma, but I was able to finally just be fully present and just understand why it was so scary and why it created that root trauma. But yeah, I can also definitely say that I have had people come to me who have gone to psychotherapy for 4 or 5 years every week, spending a lot of money doing that, of course, spending a lot of time doing that. And then they might have done, I remember this one particular person who had spent 4 or 5 years doing that. And then that person had done the first trauma special of where you heal the individual channels. I have to check which practices are there because I don't immediately remember. But there is loving kindness meditation where you establish a loving kindness energy for the traumas to come up. There is mending practice where you put together the broken individual channels. There is power retrieval where you call back the energy that has dispersed from your system, that has escaped your system. There is reverse suppression of emotions that we've discussed, and realigning the three bodies, causal, astral and physical, putting them all in right composition. And this person had done these 5 practices for one time. It takes 45 minutes to do, perhaps the guided practice. And that person said that it is more effective than 4 or 5 years of psychotherapy. And I'm not saying that psychotherapy isn't something that people should do. I'm simply pointing out that tantric practices are very effective, and the effect is immediate. But yeah, it also requires that, if you're completely shattered, you can't have a normal life, you can't take care of yourself, if your traumatization is that bad that you can't have a normal life, you can't deal and cope with daily life, then of course it is not for that kind of person. So you have to have this readiness to practice and willingness to look into the darkness and meet the darkness. So in that sense, trauma healing practices like these are not for everybody. It's only those who are up for it. I wanted to add something about you guys were discussing Amrita Kriya Yoga, where we have a bunch of different tantric exercises, we have mantras, we have breathing practices, we have certain kinds of visualizations, we have a number of deities that we work with, such as Saraswati, Ganesha, Shiva, Sundari, and so on. And of course, we can use deity mantras or we can use guru mantras. So I was speaking about shamatha and vipassana meditations before. And if we practice, like if we sit down, scan our bodies, and then start perhaps following the breath flowing in and out, and just pay attention to that. That is shamatha practice. But it's sutra shamatha practice. So according to the so-called sutrayana, sutric vehicle, this is practiced in all of Theravada Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, in Goenka retreats, in secular mindfulness. That is categorically sutra vipassana, sutra shamatha. But there is also tantric shamatha. So working with the astral body, the meridian system, with tantric tools. Amrita Kriya Yoga is tantric shamatha, categorically. And there's a third category of shamatha, which is great perfection shamatha, or Chokchen shamatha. Chokchen is a Tibetan term which means great perfection, which is Mahasandhi in Sanskrit. But I wanted to mention this. Maybe we'll go deeper into these practices and techniques and ins and outs in our next episode. But I wanted to mention Chokchen shamatha. So in Amrita Mandala we practice Tantra and then we practice Chokchen. Mainly these two. But then we also support the practice of an understanding of Tantra and Chokchen with Sutra. Sutra theory and some Sutra practices. But mainly Tantric practices and Chokchen practice. So if we look at all of this through the Chokchen lens and terminology, Chokchen also speaks of two categories of practice. They speak of trekchö, or cutting through. Trekchö is samapatti in Sanskrit. Samapatti. So there is trekchö, which is equivalent to emptiness practice, arriving at wisdom realization, arriving at the experience that all phenomena do not have a solid self, do not have a self-entity. And the second one is, so again, with Chokchen Trekchö, we are talking about causal body practice. But then there is second category of Chokchen, which is Chokchen Tögal. Tögal, in Sanskrit, Tögal is a Tibetan term which in English means leaping over or leap over. In Sanskrit it is Vyutkrantaka Samapatti. Vyutkrantaka Samapatti. It's a monster word. But this is, so there is discussion about these Tögal visions in Chokchen books, kind of these secret hush-hush things. But what we are talking about here is that, when, especially post-emptiness, when your mind rests in selflessness 24/7, this means that you can effortlessly the nature of mind is recognized in all phenomena, right? When you have that experience, again, when you have graduated Dzogchen Trekche, then you can practice Dzogchen Tegal, which is the shamatha version, shamatha in the Dzogchen system. And this addresses the astral body, the meridian system. It lights it up with this wonderful, sweet, graceful, very light, very easy, slightly blissful sense of happiness is there. So I just wanted to say about these three categories: Sutra Shamatha, Tantric Shamatha, and Dzogchen Shamatha. But when we practice Amrita Kriya Yoga with Guru mantras or deity mantras, we are just working with traumas, but also we are working how to activate the subtle body, so that when we go through that process, the end result of that is not having trauma and that the astral body is lit like a sun, like a lamp that is spontaneously lit, radiating unobstructed energy, which is flowing there, as we speak, but it's unobstructed. So it spontaneously radiates this pure light, pure energy. What is that? It is blessings. And that's how we realize that we are the source of blessings, that we are Buddhas, Mahasiddhas, essentially. So that's if we speak of, we take it a little bit further from full healing of trauma, because like we discussed, full healing of trauma does not equate with light body. But if we talk about what is possible for us, to all of us, practitioners and non-practitioners alike, we all have this pure nature. And it kind of sounds a bit of a cliche, but what it actually means is to live in this beautiful, spontaneous, graceful radiance, peaceful radiance that is spontaneous. You are not doing it. It's just like the nature of the sun. It just radiates. But that there's this grace and peace and spontaneous love and kindness, stability. That's what is possible, and that's what we want. Yeah, that's what we're after. Yeah. But maybe that's a good point to wrap up this episode and maybe continue in the next one. What do you think?
That's a good finish.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much to viewers if you made it this far. And see you in the next one. Cheers.